There is a place in southern Poland where the ground itself remembers murder, where the air feels heavy with something that cannot be named, where visitors from around the world through gates beneath sign that reads, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free, one of history's cruelest lies, where over 1 million people were systematically exterminated in the most efficient killing machine ever devised by human beings. This place is called Auschwitz. Today, it is a museum, a memorial, a UNESCO World Heritage Site where survivors, historians, and millions of visitors come to bear witness to the Holocaust's darkest chapter. The gas chambers have been sealed with concrete. The crematoria have been partially destroyed. The barracks stand empty. The railway tracks that brought hundreds of thousands to their deaths now carry no trains. But according to countless visitors, security guards, tour guides, and even some historians who work at the site, Auschwitz is not empty. They say the dead are still there. Some claim to hear screams echoing from sealed gas chambers. Others report seeing shadows moving through barracks where no living person walks. Children's laughter is heard in places where children were murdered. Visitors feel tiny, ghostly hands slip into theirs as they stand before mountains of confiscated shoes. A child's tiny sandal visible in the pile. Cameras malfunction inexplicably when trying to photograph the 7 tons of human hair displayed behind glass, hair shaved from victims before they entered the gas chambers. Are these experiences real? Are they the product of collective grief and trauma manifesting as paranormal phenomena? Or are they simply the overactive imaginations of people confronting the incomprehensible horror of what happened at Auschwitz? This is the story of Auschwitz, both the historical reality of what happened there between 1940 and 1945. And the disturbing reports of paranormal activity that have been documented in the decades since. It is a story of unimaginable evil, systematic murder on an industrial scale, and the question that haunts every visitor who walks through those gates. Can such concentrated suffering and death leave imprint on a place that never fades? We will explore the history of Auschwitz in detail, understanding exactly what made this place the ultimate symbol of the Holocaust. We will hear from survivors who experienced the camp's horrors firsthand, and we will examine the numerous reports of ghostly encounters, unexplained phenomena, and the overwhelming sense that something remains at Auschwitz that cannot be explained by history alone. This is a journey into one of humanity's darkest chapters, and a journey into the possibility that some horrors are so profound, they echo through time itself. Chapter 1. The Creation of Hell. Ask 1-40. Fury of Auschwitz begins not with death, but with a decision. In early 1940, Nazi Germany had been at war for 6 months. Poland had fallen in just weeks to the combined German and Soviet invasion. The western portion of Poland was annexed directly into the Third Reich. The central and eastern portions became what the Nazis called the General Government, a colonial territory ruled with brutal efficiency by German administrators. The Nazis had a problem: what to do with Poland's massive population, particularly the 3 million Polish Jews they now controlled. The initial solution was ghettoization, forcing into sealed urban quarters where they could be isolated from the general population. But the Nazis also needed places to imprison Polish political prisoners, intellectuals, clergy, and resistance fighters. The existing prison system was quickly overwhelmed. SS Oberführer, the higher SS and police leader for Silesia, began looking for a suitable location for a new concentration camp. He needed a place with good rail connections, access to water, and enough space to house tens of thousands of prisoners who would provide forced labor for German industry. In April 1940, Wigan's staff identified a location, a town called Auschwitz in southwestern Poland, about 40 miles west of Krakow. The Germans renamed it using the German version of the name, Auschwitz. The site had several advantages. It was located at a major railway junction where multiple rail lines converged. It had existing buildings, a former Polish army barracks that could be converted into prison facilities. It was in a relatively isolated area, surrounded by marshland that would make prisoner escapes difficult, and the local Polish population could be forcibly relocated to create a security zone around the camp. On April 27, 1940, SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, the chief of all German police and SS forces, issued the order, establish a concentration camp at Auschwitz. To command this new camp, Himmler selected Rudolf Höss, a 39-year-old SS officer who had been serving at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin. Höss was efficient and completely committed to Nazi ideology. He would prove to be one of history's most efficient mass murderers. Höss arrived at Auschwitz on May 4, 1940, with a small staff of SS officers. What they found was depressing: a collection of dilapidated buildings, muddy ground, and no infrastructure to speak of. But Höss set to work with characteristic German efficiency. The first prisoners arrived at Auschwitz on June 14, 1940. They were not Jews, but 728 Polish political prisoners transported from the prison in Tarnow. These men would become the founding population of Auschwitz, and they would be forced to build the camp that would eventually kill over 1 million people. The work was brutal. Prisoners labored from dawn to dusk, hauling stones, mixing concrete, erecting barbed wire fences, building watchtowers. They worked in all-weather scorching summer heat and freezing winter cold. They were given inadequate food, typically a thin soup made from rotted vegetables and a small piece of bread. They slept on bare wooden bunks, often 3 or 4 men crowded into a space meant for one. The SS guards, under Höss's direction, treated the prisoners with calculated cruelty. Beatings were routine. Men were forced to stand at attention in all weather during roll calls that could last half a day. Anyone who showed weakness or disobedience was sent to Block 11, the punishment block, where torture and execution were routine. By the end of 1940, Auschwitz held about 8,000 prisoners, almost all Polish political prisoners. The death rate, already catastrophic, approximately 800 prisoners died in the first year from starvation, disease, overwork, and outright murder. But Auschwitz in 1940 was still recognizable as a concentration camp, similar to others the Nazis operated throughout Germany and occupied Europe. It was a place of forced labor, punishment, and casual murder, but it was not yet a factory of death. That transformation would come in 1921 and 1942 as the Nazi plans for the final solution. The systematic extermination of European Jewry took shape. Chapter 20. Expansion and an industrial murder. On March 1, 1941, Heinrich Himmler made a second visit to Auschwitz. What he saw pleased him. Höss had transformed the muddy, dilapidated complex into an efficiently run concentration camp. Prisoners were providing forced labor to German industries in the region. The camp was running smoothly. But Himmler had bigger plans. He ordered a massive expansion of Auschwitz. The main camp, later designated Auschwitz, I would be enlarged to hold 30,000 prisoners. A second, much larger camp would be built 3 kilometers away in the village of Berzezinka, which the Germans called Birkenau. This new camp Auschwitz-Iwatzi-Birkenau would have held over 90,000 prisoners. The expansion was driven partly by economic considerations. The German chemical conglomerate IG Farben was building a massive synthetic rubber and fuel plant nearby, and they needed tens of thousands of slave laborers. A third camp, Auschwitz-Monowitz, would be built to house workers for the IG Farben plant, but there was another reason for the expansion, one that would transform Auschwitz from a concentration camp into something far worse. On July 5, 1941, Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command, sent a directive to Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the Reich Security Main Office. The directive authorized Heydrich to prepare a total solution of the Jewish question in territories under German influence in Europe. This was bureaucratic language for genocide. On January 20, 1942, senior Nazi officials met at a villa in the Berlin suburb Wannsee to coordinate the implementation of the final solution. From this meeting, preserved entered into evidence at the Nuremberg trials. Make chilling reading. The Nazis estimated there were 11 million Jews in Europe and the Soviet Union. All of them were to be eliminated. But how? The Nazis had already been murdering Jews on a massive scale in the occupied territories using special killing units called Einsatzgruppen. These units rounded up Jewish communities and shot them, often forcing victims to dig their own mass graves first. But this method had problems. It was psychologically damaging to the German soldiers doing the killing. It was slow and inefficient, and it was too visible to many witnesses. The Nazis needed a more efficient, more secretive method of mass murder. They found it in poison gas. Experiments with gas as a killing method had already been conducted. In late 1941, SS officers at Auschwitz tested a pesticide, Zyklon B hydrogen cyanide gas, typically used to fumigate buildings and kill lice. On September 3, 1941, they locked 600 prisoners of war and 256 sick prisoners into a sealed basement room in Block 11 of Auschwitz I. Zyklon beads were dropped through openings in the ceiling. Within minutes, everyone inside was dead. The test was deemed a success. Zyklon B would become the primary murder weapon of the Holocaust. Through late 1941 and early 1942, the Nazis developed their killing system at Auschwitz-Birkenau. They converted 2 farmhouses in Birkenau into gas chambers, sealing the windows and installing gas-tight doors. They built crematoria industrial furnaces for burning bodies next to the gas chambers. They constructed railway spurs leading directly into Birkenau, so that trains could deliver victims right to the gas chambers' doors. By March 1942, the system was operational. The industrialized murder of Europeans had begun. Chapter 3. The Selection, Life or Death. In 30 seconds, imagine you are a Jew living in 1942, or Poland, or Greece, or Hungary. You have heard rumors about deportations, about camps in the East, but you don't know the full truth. No one does. The Nazis have been very careful to keep the details of the final solution secret. One day, German soldiers or police come to your home, your ghetto, or your hiding place. You are arrested. You and your family are forced into freight cars, cattle cars, designed to transport livestock, not people. There are no seats, no windows. The cars are packed so tightly you can barely sit down. There might be 100 people in a space meant for 40. The journey lasts days. People die from suffocation, from heat exhaustion, from heart attacks. The dead remain standing because there is no room for them to fall. Children cry. The elderly pray. Some people go mad. Finally, after days in this hell, the train stops. The doors are thrown open. You stumble out into blinding sunlight, gasping for fresh air. You see a railway platform, guard towers, SS men in black uniforms with dogs, prisoners in striped clothing, a sign that says Auschwitz. This is the arrival at Birkenau, and what happens next will determine whether you live or die. You and the other deportees are formed into two lines, men in one, women and children in the other. An SS doctor, often the infamous Joseph Mengele, stands at the head of the platform. As each person walks past, the doctor makes a split-second decision, left or right, a gesture of the hand, nothing more. This is the selection. And it is a selection for death. Those sent to the right, typically able-bodied men and women, between roughly 15 and 45, are spared immediate death. They will be registered as prisoners, tattooed with identification numbers, and sent to forced labor. They might survive weeks, months, or even years, depending on their strength, luck, and the whims of their captors. Those sent to the left, children, the elderly, the visibly sick or weak, mothers with young children, are taken immediately to the gas chambers. They are told they are going to shower and be disinfected. Some suspect the truth. Many do not. They walk to the gas chambers, believing they are simply going through a routine arrival process. The selection process was terrifyingly efficient. An entire train of 2,000 people could be processed in less than 2 hours. About 75–80% were sent immediately to the gas chambers. The rest entered the camp as registered prisoners. Dr. Joseph Mengele, who conducted selections on the Birkenau ramp, more than any other SS doctor, would later be remembered by survivors for his immaculate appearance, perfectly pressed uniform, white gloves, boots to a shine, and for the casual whistling while deciding who would live and who would die. He treated the whole process as routine, boring even. Survivors describe the surreal, nightmarish quality of the selection. Among me with your family. The next moment, walking toward the gas chambers while you were marched to the camp, you didn't even get to say goodbye. Many deportees didn't realize what had happened until hours or days later, when they asked other prisoners where their families were and received the answer. You see that smoke from the chimney? That's your family. In the approximately 3 years that the gas chambers operated at Birkenau, an estimated 900,000 to 1,100,000 Jews were murdered there. The vast majority died within our arrival. Never registered as prisoners, their deaths not recorded in any official documents. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed. Chapter 4. The gas chambers and crematoria. The killing system at Auschwitz-Birkenau evolved over time, becoming more efficient, more hidden, more industrialized. By 1943, 4 large crematorium gas chamber complexes had been built at Birkenau, designated Crematorium IV. These were sophisticated facilities, designed by German architects and with the specific purpose of killing thousands of people per day and disposing of their bodies. Let me describe what happened to someone selected for immediate death. After the selection on the railway ramp, you and hundreds of others are marched toward a large building. SS guards tell you that you must shower and be disinfected before entering the camp, a health measure, they say. Some people are suspicious. The guards become more forceful. Faster, faster. You're holding up the line. You enter a large room, an undressing room. There are numbered coat hooks on the walls, benches to sit on. The SS guards are almost polite now. Remove all your clothing. Remember your hook number so you can find your belongings. after the shower. Some people comply quickly, eager to get clays in the freight cars. Others hesitate, uncomfortable with public nudity. The guards become harsh again. Quickly. There are others waiting. You remove your clothes and place them on the hooks, as instructed. Any valuables, watches, jewelry, money must be placed in designated baskets for safekeeping. You are now naked, vulnerable, confused. You are driven through a doorway into another room. This second room is large, capable of holding 2,000 people or more. The ceiling is low, supported by concrete pillars. There are shower heads visible in the ceiling, which seems to confirm what you've been told. There are also strange metal columns running from floor to ceiling, with perforations in them. More and more people are filled to the room. It becomes crowded, then packed. People are pressed against each other. Children cry. Some people panic, sensing that something is wrong. The guards shout at everyone to stay calm. Then the door is sealed. Heavy metal door, gas-tight seal. You hear a bolt sliding into place. There is a moment of confused silence. Then you hear a rattling sound from above, something being poured through an opening in the ceiling. Zyklon B pellets falling through the perforated metal columns. When Zyklon B's are exposed to air, they release hydrogen cyanide gas. The gas is lighter than air, so it rises. In an enclosed space, it quickly reaches lethal concentrations. The first symptoms are violent coughing and chest pain as the gas irritates the respiratory system. Then dizziness, confusion, loss of coordination. People try to climb toward the door, trampling those below them. Try to lift children toward the ceiling where the air might be clearer. The strongest fight their way upward, stepping on the weak. After about 15 to 20 minutes, everyone is dead. But the deaths are not peaceful. Cyanide gas kills by preventing cells from using oxygen. It's a form of chemical suffocation. Victims experience intense pain, convulsions, and terror before losing consciousness. When the SS ventilators clear the gas from the chamber, a door is opened by members of the Sonderkommando, Jewish prisoners forced to work in the crematoria. What they see is a pyramid of bodies piled against the door where people tried desperately to escape. Corpses are tangled together, covered in vomit and excrement. Children's bodies are at the bottom, crushed by the weight of adults who climbed over them seeking air. The Sonderkommando's job is to separate the bodies, remove any jewelry or gold teeth, cut off the women's hair, which will be shipped to Germany to be made into industrial felt and thread, and load the corpses into the crematorium furnaces. The crematoria can burn about 4,400 bodies per day across all 4 facilities. Sometimes the crematoria cannot keep up with the killing. During the murder of Hungarian Jewry in summer 1944, when 12,000 people per day being gassed, bodies had to be burned in open pits because the crematoria couldn't handle the volume. The smoke and smell of burning flesh was visible for miles. The entire process, from arrival on the railway ramp to complete disposal of the bodies, took about 4 to 6 hours for a transport of 2,000 people. Murder on an industrial scale, efficient and systematic. Chapter 5. Life Camp. The slow-doughed one who arrived at Auschwitz was murdered immediately. Those selected for forced labor entered a different hell, one more slowly, but just as surely. After selection, new prisoners were taken to a processing area. Their heads were shaved. They were stripped naked, disinfected with harsh chemicals that burned the skin, and issued prison uniforms, striped clothing in summer, the same thin striped clothing in winter. They were tattooed with an identification on their left forearm, practice unique to Auschwitz among all the Nazi camps. Then they were sent to barracks. The barracks at Birkenau were originally designed as stables for 52 horses. The Nazis 400 to 500 people into each one. There were 3-tier wooden bunks, but not enough for everyone. Many prisoners had to sleep on bare wooden planks or on the ground. There was no heat in winter, when temperatures well below freezing. In summer, the barracks were stifling, swarmed with lice and rats. Prisoners woke before dawn to a wake-up call, usually a guard banging on metal and shouting. They had minutes to use the latrine, a long wooden plank with holes over an open pit. There was no toilet paper, no privacy. Guards often beat prisoners for taking too long. Then came roll call, the appel. Prisoners assembled in rows outside the barracks in all weather, rain, snow, scorching heat. Roll call could hours, especially if the numbers didn't match up, or if someone was found missing. Prisoners stood perfectly still in their thin uniforms while SS guards counted and recounted. Older prisoners and the sick often collapsed and died during roll call. After roll call came work assignments. Prisoners marched in groups to their assigned work sites. Forced labor details building roads, moving stones, working in factories, sorting through the belongings of murdered Jews, a job assignment grimly called Canada, because Canada was seen as a land of plenty. And the warehouses full of confiscated belongings represented unimaginable wealth to starving prisoners. Work lasted 10 to 12 hours. The labor was backbreaking. Prisoners moved heavy stones, pushed carts, dug ditches, all while being beaten by guards and prisoner foremen called capos. If you couldn't keep up, you were beaten more severely. If you couldn't work at all, you were selected for the gas chamber during the next selection of sick prisoners. Food was minimal. A typical daily ration consisted of watery coffee or herbal tea in the morning, thin soup, mostly water with a few pieces of rotted vegetable at midday, a small piece of bread, perhaps 300 grams in the evening, occasionally with a tiny piece of sausage or margarine. This diet provided roughly 1,300 to 1,000 calories per day, half what a person doing hard labor needs to maintain body weight. Starvation was a constant companion. Prisoners became walking skeletons, a condition the Nazis callously called Muselmann. A Muselmann was someone who had given up, who was starving to death, who would soon die. When prisoners reached the state, they were usually selected for the gas chamber. Disease was rampant. Typhus, spread by lice, killed tens of thousands. Dysentery and diarrhea were universal. Prisoners developed open sores and skin diseases from malnutrition and unsanitary conditions. There was a camp hospital, but it was a place of horror rather than healing. The hospital staff included some genuinely caring prisoner doctors who tried to help, but medical supplies were almost non-existent. More often was where selections occurred, sick prisoners taken to the gas chambers to make room for new patients. And then there were the medical experiments. Dr. Joseph Mengele, who was not only an SS doctor but also a researcher interested in genetics and heredity, used Auschwitz prisoners as human guinea pigs. His particular interest was twins. When twins arrived at Auschwitz, Mengele would personally select them and send them to a special barracks rather than to the gas chamber. What followed was a nightmare. Mengele injected chemicals into children's eyes trying to change their color. He performed surgery without anesthesia. He infected one twin with diseases to see if the other twin would spontaneously develop the same illness. He dissected twins while they were still alive to compare their organs. Almost none of the twins used in Mengele's experiments survived. Other Nazi doctors performed equally horrific experiments, testing the limits of human endurance to cold by freezing prisoners. deliberately infecting prisoners with diseases to test experimental treatments. Sterilization experiments, bone and muscle transplants performed without anesthesia. Prison life in Auschwitz was designed to destroy the human spirit as well as the body. Prisoners were treated as less than human, as vermin to be worked to death. God could kill prisoner for any reason or no reason. Sexual violence was common. Prisoners watched their friends die daily and knew they would likely die themselves. Some prisoners found ways to resist this dehumanization. They shared food with those weaker than themselves. They organized cultural activities, poetry recitals, religious services, even a camp orchestra. They smuggled out messages to the outside world. They maintained their dignity in the face of systematic cruelty. But many broke. The combination of starvation, disease, overwork, and constant terror was too much. When you watched your family go to the gas chamber, when you saw the smoke from the crematoria every day, when you were beaten for looking at a guard the wrong way, when you saw people shun by bored SSS men, when you had no hope of rescue or liberation, it became almost impossible to maintain the will to live. The average survival time for a Jewish prisoner at Auschwitz was 3 to 4 months. Many died within weeks. Only those with extraordinary luck, strength, skills the Nazis valued, or positions in the camp hierarchy that gave them access to extra food and slightly better treatment had a chance of long-term survival. Between 940 and 945, approximately 1.3 million people were sent to Auschwitz. Of these, approximately 1.1 million died, 900,000 to 1,100,000 Jews, 70,000 Poles, 21,000 Roma, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and 10,000 to 15,000 others, including political prisoners, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. This was Auschwitz, a factory of death, designed to kill as many people as possible as efficiently as possible. With just enough forced labor capacity to profit the Nazi state along the way. On January 27, 1945, soldiers of the Soviet 60th Army entered Auschwitz. What they found there shocked even battle-hardened who had seen the worst of the Eastern Front. The Nazis had evacuated most of the camp's prisoners 10 days earlier, forcing approximately 60,000 inmates on death marches toward Germany as Soviet forces approached. As many as 15,000 died during these marches, shot by guards or dying from exhaustion and cold, but about 7,000 prisoners remained at Auschwitz, those too sick, too weak, or too young to march. The SS had intended to kill them all and destroy the evidence of the camp's crimes. But in their flee, the advancing Soviets, they left the job incomplete. The Soviet soldiers found living skeletons wandering among the barracks. Mountains of belongings confiscated from murdered prisoners, over 300,000 men's suits, 800,000 women's outfits, millions of pairs of shoes. 7 tons of human hair packed in bags, ready to be to Germany for industrial use. The ruins of gas chambers and crematoria, and everywhere the smell of death. Among the liberated prisoners were several hundred children, many of them twins who had been subjects of Mengele's experiments. Soviet military photographers and cameramen documented everything. The footage and photographs they produced emaciated prisoners, piles of bodies, warehouses full of belongings would become some of the most iconic and horrifying images of the Holocaust. The world learned the truth about Auschwitz. At the Nuremberg trials, Rudolf Höss, the camp's first commandant, testified in detail about how the camp operated and how many people had been murdered there. He showed no remorse, treating the whole process as a technical problem in logistics and efficiency. He was later tried by a Polish court, sentenced to death, and hanged on April 16, 1947, on a specially constructed gallows next to the crematorium at Auschwitz, the very site where he had supervised mass murder. In 1947, the Polish government established the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum on the grounds of the former camp. The decision was made not to demolish Auschwitz, but to preserve it as a memorial and a warning to future generations. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, as the philosopher George Santayana wrote. Today, Auschwitz-Birkenau is one of the most visited Holocaust memorial sites in the world. Over 2 million people tour the camp annually, coming from every country, every religion, every background, to witness the place where humanity's capacity for evil reached its darkest depth. But many of these visitors report experiencing something at Auschwitz that goes beyond historical education, something that suggests the past is not entirely past, something that makes them believe the dead are still there, still trying to be heard. Chapter 7. The overwhelming sadness. Almost everyone who visits Auschwitz-Birkenau describes the same feeling upon entering the camp, an overwhelming, crushing sadness that seems to emanate from the ground itself. This is not simply the sadness of learning about historical tragedy. Visitors report that the feeling hits them the moment they pass through the gates with their infamous Arbeit macht frei inscription. Even young children who know nothing about the Holocaust, even tourists who came expecting just another historical site, feeling an immediate, inexplicable wave of sorrow and dread. A visitor named Ciara Clark, who toured Auschwitz as a university student, later wrote about her experience. "I don't believe in ghosts, but I've never felt more haunted than I did the day we visited Auschwitz. There is so much to try to explain that I don't know where to begin." She described an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press down on the tour group. "I felt like I could literally sense the lives of over 1 million people lost. The whole way there was a long, stomach-churning journey. I could not shake the feeling that the ghosts of Auschwitz were still with me, still haunting me." Tour guides who work at Auschwitz full-time report that this phenomenon is universal. Groups arrive chattering and taking selfies. The moment they enter the camp, conversation stops. People become quiet, subdued, almost instinctively respectful, as if they sense they are walking on sacred or cursed ground. The silence is particularly noticeable. Auschwitz-Birkenau covers a vast area, 75 acres, at Birkenau alone. On most days, there are hundreds or even thousands of visitors on the grounds, yet the site is characterized by an eerie quiet. Few people speak above a whisper. The normal sounds of crowds' laughter, loud conversation, phone calls are almost completely absent. This silence has a quality that many describe as unnatural, as if the air itself is heavy, muffling sound, as if the place is waiting, listening. But the silence is not complete, because many visitors report hearing sounds that have no apparent source. Chapter 8. The sounds from nowhere. The most commonly paranormal phenomenon at Auschwitz is auditory. Sounds that seem to come from empty spaces, from sealed buildings, from the past itself. The most disturbing of these are the screams. Multiple visitors have reported hearing screaming coming from the sealed gas chambers at Birkenau. The gas chambers were dynamited by the Nazis in January 1945 and sealed with concrete by the Polish government after the war. No one has been inside them for decades. They are ruins partially collapsed, completely inaccessible. Yet people standing near these ruins report hearing faint screaming, sometimes accompanied by pounding, as if someone is trying to break out. The sounds are distant, muffled, as if coming from underground or from far away. They last for a few seconds or minutes, then stop abruptly. Security guards who patrol the grounds at night, when the museum is closed and no visitors are present, report this phenomenon most frequently. One guard, who spoke on condition of anonymity, described hearing the sound of many voices crying out, all at once, like a crowd in distress, coming from the direction of Crematorium 2 at Birkenau around 3 a.m. When he investigated, he found nothing. The ruins were empty. But the sound had been clear enough that he called for backup, convinced someone was in danger. When other guards arrived, they heard nothing. But this guard insists he heard it. It was real. I know what I heard. It was the sound of people screaming in terror. Another commonly reported sound is children crying. This is particularly disturbing because approximately 232,000 children were among Auschwitz's victims. Many visitors report hearing children's voices crying, calling for parents in areas of the camp where children were held or killed. A woman visiting the display of children's shoes at Auschwitz saw a pile of tiny shoes confiscated. Upon arrival at the camp, reported hearing a child crying nearby. She looked around but saw no children in the exhibition room. The crying continued for several minutes, seeming to come from the pile of shoes itself, before fading away. Other visitors have reported hearing children's laughter, which is somehow even more disturbing than crying. The laughter is described as innocent, playful, the normal sound of children at play. But it comes from places where children were murdered, creating a jarring cognitive dissonance that many find deeply unsettling. One tour guide reported hearing children's laughter coming from the barracks that housed the twins used in Mengele's experiments. She was alone in the barrack, setting up for a tour group, when she heard what sounded like two children laughing and playing. It was so clear, I thought children had somehow gotten into the restricted area, she said. When I looked, there, the laughter just stopped, like someone had turned off a switch. Footsteps are another commonly reported phenomenon. Night security guards describe hearing the sound of many people walking, shuffling feet, the kind of sound a large group makes when marching. The sound comes from empty roads, from barrack interiors, from the railway platform where selections took place. It is always the same. Many people walk together, slowly, rhythmically, as prisoners have walked during roll call, or while being marched to work details. One guard reported following the sound of marching feet through Birkenau late at night. The footsteps seemed to be just ahead of him, always out of sight around the next corner. He followed them for 15 minutes, through several camp sections before the sounds simply near the ruins of Crematorium 30. He found him standing alone in the darkness, surrounded by silence. The sounds are not always disturbing. Some visitors report hearing music, specifically the kind of music that prisoners in the camp orchestra played. The Nazis had forced talented prisoners to form an orchestra that played while prisoner work details marched out to labor assignments and returned at night. They also played for the amusement of SS officers. Visitors have reported hearing faint orchestral music near the area where the orchestra performed classical pieces, folk songs, marches. The music is distant, as if being played far away or heard through walls. It stops when approached. All of these auditory phenomena have one thing in common. They cannot be explained by normal causes. The sounds occur in empty buildings in areas where no one is present. They are heard by multiple witnesses independently. They stop when investigated. and they seem to reflect the actual historical reality. Camp, the sounds that would have been heard when Auschwitz was operational. Are these sounds real? Are they auditory hallucinations triggered by the emotional atmosphere of the site? Or are they something more, echoes of trauma so profound that they have somehow imprinted themselves on the location? Chapter 9. The shadows and figures, visual phenomena. Actual sightings of figures or shadows are reported less frequently than sounds, but they are perhaps even more disturbing when they occur. The most common visual reports involve shadows. Visitors and staff describe seeing dark, shadowy figures moving in peripheral vision. When they turn to look directly, nothing is there, but the shadows are clear enough, substantial enough, that witnesses they saw something, a person, or the outline of a person, moving where no person should be. These shadow figures are most commonly reported in the barracks. Visitors touring the preserved sleeping areas report seeing shadows move between the bunks as if someone is walking through. Tour guides conducting groups through the barracks sometimes see shadows pass through doorways or across windows. The shadows are human-shaped and human-sized. They move purposefully as if going somewhere. Then they vanish. A particularly disturbing account comes from a photographer who was granted special permission to photograph the camp before opening hours one winter morning. He was alone in one of the barracks, taking long exposure shots of the bunks, when he saw a figure walk past in the background of his frame. "I saw it clearly," he later reported. A person in striped clothing, walking slowly between the bunks. "I called out, thinking it was a staff member, maybe a cleaner. No one answered. I went to look, and there was no one there. The barracks was empty. I was the only person in the building." When he reviewed the photographs later, one image showed a blurred figure in the background, impossible to make out clearly, but definitely there. A person-shaped blur where no person had been standing. Other photographers have reported similar experiences, cameras malfunctioning in specific locations. Photographs showing mists or shapes that weren't visible when the photo was taken. Film and digital sensors producing strange artifacts only in certain parts of the camp. The most dramatic visual sightings involve fully manifested apparition, solid-looking figures that appear to be real people but cannot possibly be. A security guard reported seeing a young girl in a dress walking near the children's barracks at Birkenau late at night. This was immediately alarming. The museum closes at dusk, and there should be no visitors, especially not children, on the grounds. The guard called out and moved toward the girl to escort her off the property. The girl turned to look at him. He described her as perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair, wearing a simple dress that looked old-fashioned. Then she walked around the corner of a barracks. The guard followed, turning the corner just seconds behind her. But when he rounded the corner, she was gone. There was nowhere she could have gone. The area was open, with clear sightlines in all directions. She had simply vanished. The guard reported the incident to his supervisors. A search was conducted. No child was found. No evidence of anyone breaking into the restricted area was discovered. The guard insists on what he saw. "It was a real girl. I saw her clearly. She was as solid and real-looking as any living person. Then she was gone. I can't explain it." Similar reports in prisoner uniforms, seen standing near barbed wire fences, walking along the railway tracks, or staring out the windows of empty barracks. These figures are always dressed in the prison clothing of Auschwitz inmates. They appear for a few seconds or minutes, long enough for a witness to see them clearly. Then they disappear, fading away, walking around corners and vanishing, or simply ceasing to exist between one blink and the next. One particularly haunting account comes from a survivor who returned to Auschwitz for the first time since liberation. She was touring the Camely when she saw a woman in prison clothing standing near the Block 11 courtyard, the death block, where prisoners were tortured and executed. I recognized her, the survivor said. She was my from the camp. We were together in the same barracks. She died in 1944. I saw her cremated. But there she was, standing in the courtyard looking at me. I called her name. She smiled at me, just a small smile. Then she was gone. My family thought I was having some kind of episode, seeing things because of the memories. But I know what I saw. She was there. Are these apparitions hallucinations, tricks of light and shadow? Or are they something genuine? The spirits of the dead, somehow still present at the place where they suffered and died. Chapter 10. The physical contact, perhaps the most disturbing category of paranormal reports from Auschwitz, involves physical contact, visitors being touched by invisible presences. The most commonly reported experience involves holding hands. Multiple visitors, particularly children and young adults, report feeling a small hand slip into theirs while they are viewing the displays of belongings confiscated from victims. This happens most frequently in the rooms displaying shoes. Auschwitz-Birkenau has preserved approximately 110,000 shoes taken from prisoners, tiny fraction of the total, but still an overwhelming display. There is a pile of children's shoes behind glass, tiny baby shoes, toddler shoes, children's sandals. The sight is heartbreaking, a visceral reminder that children were murdered here. Many visitors report that while standing before this display, they feel a small hand, child's hand, gently take hold of their hand. The grip is light, tentative, the way a frightened child might hold an adult's hand for comfort. Some visitors report feeling the warmth of the small hand. Others describe it as cool, or neither warm nor cool, present. The sensation typically lasts for several seconds, or up to a minute. Visitors describe feeling comforted by it and heartbroken at the same time. Many cry. The hand then gently releases and the sensation fades. A woman visiting Auschwitz with her teenage daughter reported this experience. We were standing in front of the children's shoes. I was crying. Suddenly I felt a small hand slip into mine. I thought it was my daughter, seeking comfort. But when I looked down, my daughter was standing several feet away. There was no one next to me. But I could still feel the hand in mine, a child's hand, so small. It held on for maybe 30 seconds, then let go. I know how this sounds, but it happened. Other forms of physical contact are less comforting. Some visitors report feeling pushing or shoving, as if someone is trying to move past them in a crowd, but occurring when they are standing alone or in areas that are not crowded. Others describe feeling a hand on their shoulder, turning to see who touched them, and finding no one there. A tour guide reported being grabbed by the arm while leading a group through Block 11. I felt fingers close around my upper arm, a strong grip. I turned, thinking one of my group needed my attention. No one was near me, but I could still feel the hand gripping my arm. Then it released. I had finger-shaped red marks on my arm that lasted for hours. Some visitors report feeling someone breathing on them, or feeling breath on the back of their neck in places where no one is standing behind them. Others describe sudden sensations of cold, as if they have walked into a refrigerator, concentrated in one specific spot. Step to left or right and the temperature is normal. Step back to that one spot and it's intensely cold. Physical sensations also include sudden feelings of pressure, difficulty breathing, or chest pain, particularly when entering the gas chamber at Auschwitz I, the only gas chamber that remains intact. This gas chamber is now open to visitors as part of the museum tour. Many visitors report feeling an immediate onset of anxiety, difficulty breathing, and a desperate urge to leave when they enter this chamber. Some attribute this to knowledge of what happened there, a psychosomatic response to being in a room where thousands died, but others insist the sensation is more than psychological. They describe physical symptoms: tight chest, rapid heartbeat, feeling faint that begin the instant they enter the chamber and stop the moment they leave. One visitor, an otherwise healthy young man, had to be helped out of the gas chamber after he began hyperventilating and nearly passed out. He reported feeling as if the air was being sucked out of his lungs, even though the chamber is now open to the air and perfectly safe. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating. I had to get out. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. Medical staff at the museum confirm that they treat visitors for panic attacks, fainting spells, stress-related symptoms daily. Some of these are clearly psychological responses to the emotional weight of the site. But others occur in people who seemed fine moments before, who show no signs of distress until they enter specific locations: the gas chamber, certain barracks, the area near the crematoria. Are these experiences genuine paranormal phenomena? Or are they the power of place, the weight of history and knowledge creating physical symptoms? Perhaps the distinction doesn't matter, whether the sensations are caused by spirits or by the overwhelming emotional resonance of a place where such terribles happened. The effect is the same. Auschwitz feels haunted. Chapter 11. The scientific investigations. Given the numerous reports of paranormal phenomena at Auschwitz, it might be surprising that the site has never been the subject of a professional paranormal investigation, the kind conducted by ghost hunting teams at other alleged locations. This is a deliberate decision by the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. The museum's administration has made it clear that Auschwitz is not a tourist attraction for ghost hunters. It is a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust and a place of historical education. The museum does not permit ghost hunting equipment, seances, or paranormal investigations on the grounds. We are not interested in whether Auschwitz is haunted, a museum spokesperson stated in response to requests from paranormal investigation groups. Our mission is to preserve the historical truth and honor the memory of those who died here. The experiences some visitors have are personal, and we respect that. But we will not turn this place into entertainment for those seeking ghosts. This policy has largely kept serious paranormal investigators away from Auschwitz. However, individual researchers and journalists interested in the paranormal have visited the site on their own and documented their experiences. One such researcher described bringing in an EMF, electromagnetic field, detector to Auschwitz, concealed in a backpack. EMF detectors are commonly used in paranormal investigation based on the theory that spirits can influence electromagnetic fields. The researcher reported that the detector showed unusual spikes in readings near the crematoria ruins and in certain barracks, but acknowledged that these spikes could have numerous mundane explanations: electrical wiring, metal in the buildings, interference from other visitors' electronic devices. What makes Auschwitz difficult from a paranormal investigation standpoint? That it's impossible to establish controlled conditions. The site is visited by thousands of people daily. There is no opportunity for overnight investigations in sealed environments. no ability to set up monitoring equipment undisturbed. Any unusual readings or phenomena could be contaminated by the sheer number of people present. Moreover, there is a significant ethical question. Even if paranormal investigation were permitted, would it be right to attempt or communicate with the spirits of Holocaust victims? These were people who suffered unimaginable trauma. If their spirits do linger at Auschwitz, is it ethical to disturb them for the purpose of investigation? Most paranormal researchers who have concluded that the answer is no. The dignity and peace of the victims must take precedence over scientific curiosity about the paranormal. However, what can be said with certainty is that the phenomena reported at Auschwitz are consistent, widespread, and documented by numerous independent witnesses over decades. The reports follow patterns, the same types of experiences reported in the same locations, by people who have no contact with each other, and often no knowledge of previous reports. This consistency is what paranormal researchers call residual haunting, the theory that traumatic events can imprint themselves on a location, creating a kind of psychic recording that plays back under certain conditions. Not intelligent spirits interacting with the living, but rather echoes of the past manifesting as sights, sounds, and sensations. If residual haunting is a real phenomenon, Auschwitz would be one of the most likely places on Earth to experience it. The sheer scale of suffering and death of 1 million people murdered in one location over a period of years represents trauma on a scale almost unmatched in human history. Chapter 12. The testimony of those there. Perhaps the most credible reports of phenomena at Auschwitz come from the people who are full-time, the museum staff, guides, security guards, and maintenance workers who spend thousands of hours on the grounds. These are not sensation seekers looking for ghosts. They are professionals doing serious work preserving history and educating visitors. Many of them were skeptical about paranormal phenomena when they began working at Auschwitz. But years of experience at the site have changed the minds of many. One tour guide who has worked at Auschwitz for over 15 years spoke anonymously about her experiences. When I started this job, I didn't believe in ghosts. I thought people who reported seeing or hearing things were just overly emotional because of the history. But after years of working here, I can't explain away what I've experienced. She described numerous incidents: hearing crying when no one was present, seeing shadows move in empty barracks, feeling presences around her during early morning or late evening when the museum is closed. There are parts of the camp I avoid when I'm alone. The area near Crematorium 30 at Birkenau, I won't go there by myself. The atmosphere is wrong. It feels occupied, like someone is there watching. Security guards report the most frequent paranormal experiences. Likely be because they are the ones present at the camp during nighttime hours, when it's quiet and dark. Multiple guards report similar experiences: hearing footsteps, seeing shadows, feeling uncomfortable or watched in certain areas, experiencing equipment malfunctions, flashlights dying, radios cutting out in specific locations. One guard described his first overnight shift at Birkenau. They warn you during training that the place feels different at night. I thought they were just trying to scare the new guys. My first solo patrol through the barracks at Birkenau around 2 a.m., I understood. The silence is not natural. It's like the air is heavy. I kept feeling like someone was following me, staying just out of sight. I'd turn around and no one was there. I heard footsteps several times, clear footsteps on the wooden floors of the barracks. I'd investigate and find nothing. After that first night, I understood why some guards refused to patrol certain areas alone. The museum's conservation and maintenance staff also report unusual experiences. Workers who spend time in normally restricted areas of the camp, particularly in the underground areas and the ruins of the gas chambers and crematoria, describe feeling unwelcome, a strong sense that they are intruding on a space where they don't belong. One maintenance worker reported, "I was doing repair work in the basement of Block 11, in the area that was used for punishment cells. I've worked in creepy places before, old buildings, underground spaces. But that basement, I lasted 20 minutes before I had to get out. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. The atmosphere was oppressive, suffocating, like the walls were closing in." I've heard other workers say the same thing. No one wants to work down there alone. Staff members also report that certain areas of the camp have higher incidence of emotional distress among visitors. Tour guides know which parts of the tour route are most likely to trigger fainting, panic attacks, or emotional breakdowns. Interestingly, these problem areas don't always correspond to the most graphically disturbing historical information. Some visitors are fine viewing the gas chamber and crematorium, but become extremely distressed in certain barracks or near certain locations in Birkenau. There's a spot near the ruins of Crematorium Dun, one guide reported, where visitors regularly become very upset. More than in other locations, they report feeling dizzy, nauseous, overwhelmed. We've learned to move groups through that area relatively quickly and to watch for signs of distress. Something about that specific location affects people strongly. The collective testimony of Snambers, who work at Auschwitz, daily paints a picture of a location where the past feels very much present. Whether this is evidence of genuine paranormal phenomena or simply the psychological weight of working in a place of such profound historical tragedy is to determine definitively. What is clear is that Auschwitz affects people in ways that are difficult to explain purely through rational historical understanding. The place has an atmosphere that many describe as haunted, whether or not they believe in ghosts. Chapter 13. The Survivor's Perspectives. What survivors think about reports of ghostly activity at Auschwitz? The answer is complex and varies from person to person. Some survivors dismiss the paranormal reports entirely. Having lived through the actual horror of Auschwitz, they find the idea of ghosts almost trivializing. The real horror was what living human beings did to other living human beings. The evil was human, not supernatural. Others are more open to the possibility. Several survivors who have returned to Auschwitz decades after liberation report experiencing strong emotional and even paranormal sensations. Edith Molnar, a survivor who later worked with the Auschwitz Memorial, was interviewed about a photographer's project capturing ghosts at Auschwitz through long exposure photography. When shown the photographs, which depicted shadowy figures moving through the camp, she reportedly became emotional and said, "These are my images. This is what I see when I close my eyes." Other survivors report feeling the presence of those who didn't survive when they returned to Auschwitz. They describe it not as frightening, but as deeply moving, a sense that their murdered friends and family members are somehow still connected to the place. One survivor, returning to Auschwitz for the 70th anniversary of liberation, reported, "When I walked through the gates again, I felt all of them, all my friends who didn't make it out. They're welcoming me back. I know that sounds, but that's what I felt. They're still there, not suffering anymore, just waiting to be remembered." This raises a theological and philosophical question. If the spirits of Auschwitz victims do linger at the camp, why? In many cultural and religious traditions, ghosts are said to be spirits that cannot rest, that remain bound to earth due to unfinished business, trauma, or violent death. If this is true, Auschwitz would be a place where countless spirits might remain victims whose lives were cut short, who died violently and unjustly, whose deaths were often unmarked and anonymous, whose bodies were burned and ashes scattered. From a Jewish perspective, and the vast majority of Auschwitz's victims were Jewish, there are complex theological issues at play. Judaism generally doesn't emphasize ghosts or hauntings in the same way as some other religious traditions. However, Jewish mysticism does acknowledge the possibility of souls being unable to complete their journey to the afterlife, particularly in cases of violent or premature death. Some Jewish scholars and rabbis have suggested that the spirits at Auschwitz, if they exist, remain not because they are trapped, but because they are bearing witness. They are ensuring that what happened is not forgotten. They are, in a sense, continuing the resistance they began in life, refusing to be erased, insisting on being acknowledged. This interpretation transforms the haunting of Auschwitz from something frightening into something almost sacred. The ghosts, if they exist, are not there to harm the living but to remind them, to ensure that the phrase "never again" remains meaningful, to make certain that the 6 million murdered in the Holocaust are not reduced to statistics but remain real, present, impossible to ignore. Epilogue. The question that haunts us all is Auschwitz haunted. After examining the history, the testimony of visitors and staff, the numerous reports of paranormal phenomena, we are left with a question that cannot be definitively answered. From a strictly materialist perspective, ghosts do not exist, and all reported paranormal phenomena must have rational explanations, hallucinations, psychological responses to emotional stress, tricks of light and shadow, coincidence, interpreted as meaningful by grieving or disturbed minds. But Auschwitz challenges our comfortable materialism. It fronts us with evil and suffering on a scale that seems to demand something beyond mere historical documentation. The place feels wrong in a way that transcends rational explanation, and the consistency of paranormal reports. The same phenomena reported by independent witnesses over decades is difficult to dismiss entirely. Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. Perhaps there is something at Auschwitz that is not quite supernatural, but not quite natural either. The weight of memory, the accumulated grief of millions, the psychic imprint of trauma so profound that it has altered the very fabric of the place. Or perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps what people experience at Auschwitz is not ghosts in the traditional sense, but rather an overwhelming confrontation with historical reality. The presence they feel is not the spirits of the dead, but the inescapable presence of what happened there, an evil so vast that knowing about it intellectually is not enough. You have to feel it. And that feeling is so intense that it manifests as physical sensations, auditory phenomena, visual experiences. In the end, whether Auschwitz is really haunted, it may be less important than what the question reveals about us. We want the dead to be remembered. We need them to matter. And on some level, perhaps we need to believe that such immense suffering cannot simply disappear into history, that it must leave some mark on the world that endures. The ghosts of Auschwitz were imagined, serve a purpose. They ensure we cannot forget. They make the history personal, immediate, impossible to file away as something that happened long ago to other people. They force us to confront the Holocaust not as distant history but as present reality. More than 1 million people died at Auschwitz. Their suffering was real. Their deaths were real. And the evil that killed them was perpetrated by real human beings, not monsters, but people who convinced themselves that what they were doing was justified, necessary, even righteous. If Auschwitz is haunted, perhaps it is haunted not just by the dead, but a question: how could this happen? How could ordinary people participate in such extraordinary evil? And perhaps most terrifyingly, could it happen again? These are the ghosts that truly haunt Auschwitz. Not spirits, but questions. Not supernatural phenomena, but historical truth. The haunting is not what we hear or see at Auschwitz. The haunting is what we carry with us when we leave. Because once you have walked through Auschwitz, once you have stood in the gas chamber and looked at the mountain of shoes and read the names of the dead, you cannot unknow what you know. You cannot unfeel what you have felt. You carry Auschwitz with you for the rest of your life. In that sense, we are all haunted by Auschwitz. The ghosts have left their camp and walked out into the world, ensuring that what happened then never be forgotten, never be diminished, never be repeated, and perhaps that it is exactly as it should be. Final words. Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum remains open to visitors from around the world. Over 2 million people the site annually. If you go, you will walk where over 1 million people died. You will see the barracks where they slept, the railway platform where they were selected for life or death, the ruins of the gas chambers where they were murdered. You may or may not experience anything paranormal. But you will certainly experience something profound, because Auschwitz is not really about ghosts. It is about memory. It is about bearing witness. It is about ensuring that the victims are not forgotten and that the lessons are never lost. The inscription at the entrance to the Auschwitz Museum reads, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Whether or not spirits walk the grounds of Auschwitz, that truth haunts us all. The end.